So I've read the Substack articles by Jessica Reed Krause about the Idaho murders, and my knee-jerk initial reaction is that they're garbage. They're mostly conjecture and conspiracy theories. There's no real foundation of facts or truth. It's just stories that she has scraped from the bottom of Twitter and TikTok. And the comments sort of, they mirror the credibility and the quality of the writing of the post. The comments are all conspiracy theory, tinfoil hat wearing people who just take everything at face value. They don't question it and they don't do any research, which is a very common problem on social media, specifically TikTok. Now, I also run a true crime TikTok page, and I've been posting about the case. And that the TikTok page is my character analysis. Sorry about that. My character analysis is my TikTok page. And I'm getting a lot of comments about the frat guy Dave and the recent WSU Kim interviews. And everyone's telling me, you've got to listen to them. You've got to listen to them. And so today and yesterday, I took the time and I sat down and I went through several podcasts that have these interviews. And two that I listened to, one was from True Crime Cafe and one was from the Drunk Turkey podcast. And this is where I believe the Drunk Turkey podcast is where I believe WSU Kim originated. Now, WSU Kim, as her name suggests, she is the mother of a student at WSU. And she was at Parents Weekend at WSU, which is in Pullman, Washington, on the weekend of November 12th and 13th. And in this interview, she explains that she spent the afternoon with her son while her husband went to the football game with their daughter. And then later that night, they switched, and the father and the son went to dinner, and the mother and the daughter went out drinking because the daughter's 21. So they pick up the mother and the daughter from the bar around 11:30 or 12, get the daughter back to her place. And then the next day, the parents leave for home somewhere around, I don't know, sometime in the late afternoon, mid to late afternoon. So Kim says that around 5 or 5:30, she gets an alert on her phone about the murders. And she calls her daughter and she asks her daughter about it. And the daughter says, yeah, I know. And she said, well, how do you know? And she said, well, her roommates, her friends, something to do with the sorority. She has a friend whose boyfriend goes to University of Idaho, and he's the one that told the girlfriend, and then the girlfriend told the daughter. And Kim says, well, what were you told? And the daughter said, well, I was told that 4 students were stabbed and that they died. Now, keep in mind, this is like 5:30, the day of the murders. And Kim is very, very pressed that her daughter had this information so earlier than her, to the point where it's very odd at how Kim seems so bothered by the fact that the daughter had this information. And so they press on a little bit, and Kim says, well, she just starts talking about Greek life and all the conspiracy theories. And I mean, it really spiraled into these conversations about how Bethany's going to have to go into witness protection. And she used the phrase bitches or snitches get stitches. And what stood out to me most was Kim could never really complete a thought. And when she did, it was so jammed with extraneous detail that I found myself getting so frustrated, because I had to stop and start these podcasts multiple times because it was taking forever to get any relative information. But there were a few things that stuck out to me in Kim's interview. And this is just in the first 30 minutes of the Drunk Turkey interview. Kim says that the husband went to the football game with the daughter, and one of the co-hosts says, "Oh, you didn't go to the game?" And she said, "No, it was wet, it was cold, it was rainy." And I was like, let's head over to Google and let's double check that. And according to the almanac, the weather for November 12th in Pullman, Washington, do you know what the percentage of rain and melted snow was for November 12th, 2022? 0.0%. And then something else that stuck out to me is when she said she was on the ride home and she received an alert about the murders. What alert? Vandal alerts and WSU alerts, they're only for faculty and students. They're not for parents. So what alert is she referring to? And finally, when she said that the daughter told her that 4 students were stabbed and that she heard this at, 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning, the police never released the cause of death until I think it was about November 17th. Now, is it possible that there was somebody on campus that maybe knew this and somebody told somebody? Absolutely. But the accuracy sticks out to me and feels a little implausible. So she says she didn't go to the football game because it was raining and cold. Well, the weather wasn't raining and cold that day. It was actually sunny and very nice. She talks about the alert that she received. She never goes into what alert. Why would she be getting an alert? She was incredible. And the fact that she was pressing her daughter for information about how she learned about these murders. What's important to remember is at that point, right, the day at November 13th, late afternoon, we didn't have a timeline established. Nobody knew what time the roommates woke up, what time 911 was called. So why was WSU Kim, why was she so pressed? Why was she so bothered that the daughter knew that early? Now, before I go any further, I've linked all of this in the post that this episode is embedded in. The YouTube podcasts are linked, and I give you the timestamps of when you can find out, when you can hear the sections of the conversation where she reveals these things. The other thing that WSU did that not only made me want to rip all my hair out, but that immediately signaled to me that she was being deceptive was the amount of detail she crammed into literally every sentence. She could never just answer a question. She had trouble finishing thoughts. She seemed to jump from thought to thought. And quite honestly, she sounded like she'd been drinking. And I don't know about a lot of kids. I know how when I was a kid, the last thing I'd be doing at 21 on parents' weekend is drinking with my mother or bringing my mother out with my friends because she said that her daughter was going out with her friends. That's sort of the last thing I'd be doing. Now, maybe they just have a different relationship, which is totally possible. But something about that felt off to me. And in all of these interviews, here's this mom who doesn't go to any of these schools, who admitted in the original Chronicles of Olivia interview that she was never part of Greek life. And yet she knew so much about the Pi Phis and the Beta Phis and the this Phi and the that Phi. She knew so much about Greek life for somebody who was never part of Greek life. And just the beat that I got in this woman was, she's not a regular mom. She's a cool mom. She goes out drinking with her daughter, and she knows all about the sorority and Greek row and Greek life. And she's oddly invested in all of this. And she talks about how she's spoken to the FBI. And I don't understand how the FBI could, I'm a nobody. And in the first 30 minutes of that drunk turkey interview, I found minimum 3 kind of big lies, or at least 3 questionable statements that didn't really hold up, that didn't pass the sniff test. And the only thing I could think, this just because of, maybe she was just one of those moms who, like, maybe she is one of those cool moms and she just wants to be really involved in her daughter's life. But there was just, the whole time I was listening to her, all I could think of was Damien with the hoodie pulled over his head and the sunglasses on, standing up and screaming, "She doesn't even go here." That's how I felt about this. Like, this woman just seemed to be trying so hard to prove sort of how like how close she and her daughter were, and how her daughter tells her all this kind of stuff, and she's so knowledgeable. And it just, to me, it reeked of somebody who maybe missed out on college life and is trying to somehow relive or recapture those days. I don't know, but her credibility for me is non-existent. She couldn't finish any sentences. A lot of the stuff she said just didn't make sense. You know, she's talking about, I mean, she alludes to Bethany, who was one of the surviving roommates, potentially having to go into witness protection, and that they're afraid to return to Moscow because they're going to be killed, and that they were locked in Bethany's bedroom while the murders were happening, and they were told not to come out, and they were told not to call. It's all so far-fetched, to the point it's fantastical. And something that will always bother me, and you know, this is something I'm very passionate about. It's online harassment of women. And these roommates, I have been vocal from the start about the harassment that these roommates have experienced. And I really can't, I've done some interviews where I talk about survivor's guilt and how the, you know, people who experience survivor's guilt, the more, you know, the fatality rate, the number of people who take their own lives, it's alarmingly high. And to know that these 2 young girls, whose lives as they know it are completely over, are now being subjected to a lot of this. And that's really the root of all these conspiracy theories, right? Everything. It's all about how can we somehow blame the roommates? How can we somehow say the roommates did something wrong? And that's, I think, what irritates me about both WSU Kim and this frat guy Dave, is that, okay, let's say that people knew about the murders at 9:00 a.m. Okay. How would that change the outcome? It wouldn't. What if they were removing product from their house? What if they were? How does that change the outcome? How is that? I don't understand, other than what they're saying is, well, they don't want anybody to know that it was drug related. Okay. But again, that still doesn't change. It doesn't change the outcome of what happened. And it's disturbing to me how so many people, and most of them are women, which is very disappointing, how determined some of them are to re-traumatize and blame the surviving roommates. Now, as far as frat guy Dave, he claims that he woke up on the 13th, and he woke up fairly early, and then he noticed that there were a ton of notifications on his phone, Snapchat notifications. And he said he didn't really look at them. He didn't look at them because he had to get ready for work. He had to be at work, I believe, at 9:30. And then when he finally did look at them, he saw the news. Now, what he never tells anybody is the timestamps, because I could see somebody, him having, you know, some notifications on his phone, and then getting a ton more once news of the murders had spread, and him not looking at the timestamps, and him sort of conflating and putting them all together. But he never says when all these messages come in. And neither he nor WSU Kim have been able to prove with screenshots that they received these texts from their children or from their fraternity brothers or their friends. Nobody has presented any proof. And that disturbs me, because a phenomenon that I notice, especially on TikTok, is all someone has to do is hear the same thing repeated a few times and they'll start repeating it. I had comments today about a podcast I should listen to, something Jules. I don't know what it was. And I went and I listened to it. And they said, listen to what she's saying about the DNA evidence. And the podcast host starts off the episode by saying, now, I just want to be clear that I'm not really sure if I'm interpreting this information correctly. Okay, well, she's telling you from the start, she's not even sure if what she's about to say is accurate or true. And yet you're all repeating it like it's fact, and you're not doing any research. 30 minutes into that interview with WSU Kim, and I'd already found 3 inconsistencies, big ones. And I find that in situations like this where people, they want to believe something, and whether it's that this is tapping into people's very valid fear of police and the very real issue of police corruption, and so people are tapping into that and going with that because they want to believe that police are corrupt and they can't be trusted, which they can't, and they are corrupt and they can't be trusted, is my personal opinion. I think it starts from there. There's this pre-existing bias, and then they seek out anything that confirms that bias, and nothing you say can convince them otherwise. Now, Frat Guy Dave also says that the night of the murders, there were some guys out in the field. We all saw that. The police stopped them. I think they were drinking alcohol. And so the police pulled over these 3 kids and, lectured them or whatever. And apparently before the police arrived, one of the kids threw something away or disposed of something. And I don't know what it was, and Dave doesn't say what it was, but he goes back the next morning around 9:30 a.m. to get this, whatever it was that he disposed of. And he and his friend are there, and he gets whatever it is that he sort of hid, I assume. And he says that when he looks up, there's a guy dressed in all black, and he's tall and he's thin and he has thick eyebrows, and he's sort of hunched a little bit, and he's got the hoodie over his head, and he says he has a big nose and that he's just kind of like lingering around the area. And then at one point the guy turns and looks at him, and he said he just had this really cold, dead stare. And the podcast host asked Dave, did your friend tell you about this guy before or after Bryan Kohberger was arrested? And Dave goes quiet, because I think he knew what the answer was, which was after, not before. Because if it was before and there was that physical description, well, there's more validity, more credibility to what he's saying. But if it's after, not so much. And he says, I'm not really sure. I just know that it was like a while ago. And the thing is, I believe that. I believe that there was somebody lingering around that house at that time. We know that Kohberger was in that area. We don't know exactly where, but we know he was near that house at, 9:12 the next morning. And, they said they didn't see his car. And that makes sense, because he probably parked his car somewhere else, or he ran. Now, we know that they just did search warrants for his Strava app. So I wonder, and those apps, they can really pinpoint locations better than cell towers. And I wonder if what they're looking for is to find out if that's where he was. If they're trying to pinpoint where was he the next morning, because we know his cell phone was in that area, but we don't have his car. So I could see them pulling the information from his Strava app to try and determine if he was in the area. My general impression of Frat Guy Dave is I don't think he's lying. I think I believe he believes what he's saying. I just happen to think that he might be wrong. I think he might not know when those notifications came in, and he might have the timeline wrong. And Kim, I just think is lying. Kim, I just think is lying. Now, there's something else that I want to address, and it's something that I noticed this week, and I was watching a TikTok by a creator named Boundless Millennial. And in it, it's a clip from one of the very early press conferences with Chief Fry. And I'm going to play the section for you right now.
When the call came in, it was for an unconscious person, and also that was a stabbing. It seems, just from an outside perspective looking in, like that would be not the first thing a person calling in would think.
You're right. The report that we got was that it was an unconscious individual. It wasn't until our officers arrived on scene, went in to do caregiving check on the individual who was unconscious, that we found the scene that we found.
Okay, thank you. There's no sign.
That's very important. And it also aligns with a press release that they issued around November 20th that they posted on their Facebook page. November 20th, 2022, Moscow homicide update. Detectives are releasing that on the morning of November 13th, the surviving roommates summoned friends to the residence because they believed one of the second-floor victims had passed out and was not waking up. At 11:58 a.m., a 911 call requested aid for an unconscious person. The call originated from inside the residence on one of the surviving roommates' cell phone. Multiple people talked with the 911 dispatcher before a Moscow police officer arrived at the location. Officers entered the residence and found the 4 victims on the 2nd and 3rd floors. Now, here's what's interesting about that. Chief Fry says that they received a call about an unconscious person at 11:58, and that when the police arrived, that they went into the house to check on somebody, to tend to the unconscious individual, and that's when they found the scene. That's when they knew what had really happened. Now, when you call 911 for an emergency, there are 4 things that must be revealed or disclosed during the call. And the first is the number you're calling from. And then the second is the nature of the emergency. Details about the emergency, such as a physical description of a person who may have committed a crime, a description of any fire that might be burning, or a description of injuries or symptoms being experienced by a person having a medical emergency. Now, from the article Eyes of a Killer, written by Howard Bloom, that was published in Airmail in January, the first week in January, here's some information about 911. All the town's 911 calls are routinely routed to Pullman, about 10 miles west in Washington State and home to Washington State University, where they're handled by the civilian employees of a municipal agency called Whitcomb 911. Now, remember, it was football weekends. And it says, things only get worse on football weekends. Therefore, when the callers are agitated rather than risk injurious delays by probing for details, the responders swiftly assign a generic explanation. Unconscious person is one of the standard catchphrases. It can mean precisely what it says, or it can be shorthand for something more ominous. Now, we have 3 instances of somebody being unconscious the morning of the bodies were found. We have the roommates calling 911 for an unconscious person. And then we have what could have been 911 assigning the label of unconscious person to the 911 call when dispatching it. And then we have the roommate that allegedly ran out of the house hyperventilating and passed out. My gut says the roommate never passed out and she never ran out of the house hyperventilating. My gut says that the roommates called 911 because they couldn't reach Xana. And so the initial call put in was for an unconscious person. Now remember, it says that the roommates called people over because one of their roommates wasn't responding, that wasn't waking up, which implies that they were trying to wake up this person and the person wasn't waking up. Now, we know what the scene looked like. We know that Xana was found on the floor. We know that it was a very bloody scene. Now that tells me if someone couldn't, quote unquote, wake them up, couldn't get a response, what that tells me is they didn't see inside that room when they called those friends over. That tells me they couldn't get inside the room. And that when the friend came over, the friend was asked to come over. Maybe they called the friend because they were wondering, hey, is Xana with you? We're calling her. Her phone's ringing. She's not answering. Is Xana with you? Is Ethan there? Whatever. Because remember, the surviving roommates were in bed when the victims came home. So they don't really know if they brought anybody home with them. And so I think they were concerned that the thud that they heard could have been Xana. And that maybe she was passed out. Maybe she was unconscious. Or, and I know that this was a rumor. This was a rumor. And I think it's totally possible because it is college. And frankly, because unfortunately, I lost a college-age family member to an overdose. They could have feared that it was an overdose. And so they first, of course, call a friend. That is just what anybody would do in that moment. I don't care how old you are. If you don't know what's going on, you're not calling the police. You're calling a friend. And I think the friend got there, and I think they could not get into the room. Now, maybe somehow the friend that they called over, which we're assuming is Hunter J., we saw that ladder standing by the side of the house. And it was the side closest to Xana's room. Maybe somebody climbed up on that ledge and looked in through the window because the shades were closed, so we don't know how much they could see again. And so maybe he said, I see someone on the floor. And that's when they called police. But one thing I feel very certain about is that when the surviving roommates called friends over, they didn't know it was a crime scene. They didn't know that there were 4 people dead in that house. I believe when the police were called, when the 911 call was placed, it was placed because they felt whoever they were trying to reach in that second floor bedroom wasn't responding. I think the call was for an unconscious person. These stories about the surviving roommates cleaning the house and getting rid of drug paraphernalia, it doesn't fit. Let's say they did wake up at 9:00 and they discovered Xana was passed out. I don't know. They couldn't lie to the police and say, well, we just thought she was passed out, if they knew things were worse, because police would know. Police would be able to tell. Like, how they wouldn't have been cleared. Their phone data was reviewed. They wouldn't have been cleared if police suspected that there were hours before police was called. And they check that kind of thing. And if you think that they didn't check those phones where they were contacting people and asking people to come over, and I think when they say friends, I think it could have just been maybe 1 or 2 people. And I don't think at the time they knew it was a crime scene. I'm really determined to do what I can to show people that these roommates are innocent. And it's disturbing and disappointing to me how quickly, even if you watch the early press conferences, like the first couple, and you see the questions being asked, you can see right away everybody is honing in on those roommates. And that's where that speculation started, was with the roommates. And no matter how often the police said, no, we've cleared them, police cleared them, FBI had to have been involved with that. It's as if nothing's enough. And yet I can remember the Jodi Arias case where she had killed Travis Alexander. He had been in the house for 2 days. There was a roommate there. The roommate apparently never noticed the awful smell. And nobody was saying, well, why didn't he call police? Well, why didn't he do this? Well, why didn't he do that? How could he have not smelled it? You didn't see the same kind of speculation around Travis Alexander's roommate that you see around these surviving roommates of this case. And I think it's obvious, the difference, the one glaring difference. And it's that they're women. And people are assuming that because these were women who lived with women, and some maybe were more conventionally attractive than others, that there had to have been jealousy, that there had to have been somebody had to have been harboring bad feelings. And this is why women's trauma, this is why it always goes dismissed. This is why nobody takes it seriously. So, and this is why I've become an advocate for women who experience online harassment. So these are my thoughts, and this is a free post. So I want to hear what you think. The comments are open. Please be respectful. Please be respectful. Please be kind. And that means, listen, if you think there's more to this, I'm happy to have this conversation. Like, I'm open to that, but just please be respectful. Please try to back up whatever you say with links, or it just makes the conversation that much more thoughtful, that much more engaging. But I welcome your feedback, and thanks for listening.